occasion hybrid meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee, which is open to the press and public on request. This meeting will not be broadcast live, however a recording will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting is concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members attending via Microsoft Teams refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. I'm aware there's a lot of new faces around the table and in the chamber this afternoon, so I'm going to do a quick introduction around everybody. If we just introduce ourselves and say what department we're representing. We'll start with the table. I'm Kath Beggington and I'm going to chair this meeting this afternoon. On my left.
Yeah, I'm Stephen Vickers. I'm the Chief Executive of Torvine Council.
Nigel Aurelius, Deputy Chief Executive, Section 151 of Torvine Council.
Hello everyone, Mark Rees. I'm one of the co-opted lay members. Thank you.
Councillor David Williams, one of the members of the committee.
Delith Harris, Monitoring Officer.
Thank you. And if we start with the people who are sat in front of me, and then we'll come to the people who have come in on Microsoft.
Tom Roberts, Business and Democratic Support Services Manager.
Catherine Joseph, Corporate Improvement Officer.
Leanne Skellett, Corporate Improvement Officer.
Peter Williams, Edwinton Audit.
Jason O'Brien, Strategic Director for Children and Families.
Rachel Jowett, Strategic Director, Economy and Environment.
James Vale, Head of Customer Digital and IT Services, representing adults and communities.
Thank you. And if you can go to those who you have come in on remote.
I'll start. Councillor Peter Jones, Cabinet Member for Corporate Governance and Performance.
Councillor Giles Davis, I'm Second Ward Member.
Councillor Nick Byrne, UN Ward Member.
Councillor Stuart Ashley, Continued Ward Member.
And the officer.
Michael Kelleher, lay member and Deputy Chair of the Governance and Audit Committee.
David Lilly, Director of Financial Services.
I'm Alice King. I'm the new Audit Manager from Audit Wales.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Owen. I'm the new Performance Audit Lead from Audit Wales.
Thank you all very much. And I'd like to introduce Jade Harvey, who's going to be taking the minutes for us this afternoon. This is the first time Jade has worked with this committee as well. So welcome, Jade. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that. Please remember to keep your microphones muted when you're not talking. Now, moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 1, welcome and apologies. Jade, do we have any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. No apologies for today.
Thank you. It looks like a full house. Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Jade, could you please ask the members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any interest to declare?
Of course, no problem. Starting with Councillor Ashley.
None that I'm aware of.
Councillor Byrne.
None that I'm aware of.
Councillor Davis.
None that I'm aware of at the moment.
Councillor Jones.
None.
Mr. Kelleher.
Sorry, my microphone. I have a small pension from Torvine Council. That's all.
Fab, thank you. Yourself, Chair?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Rees?
Nothing to declare, thanks.
Fab. And Councillor Williams?
Nothing I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 3, which is the annual self-assessment and wellbeing report. Stephen Vickers, I think you're going to report.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the Local Government and Elections Act 2021 and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015 requires that all councils in Wales to publish an annual self-assessment report setting out the extent to which we are meeting our performance requirements and publish an annual report of our progress against our wellbeing objectives. This report set out in Appendix 1 is a draft of our statutory annual report meeting both requirements for the financial year 2022-23. Bringing this report into Governance and Audit Committee is part of the overall statutory process for producing our annual report, providing further rigour and assurance that the Council is doing all that it can to meet its performance requirements. All councils are required to keep their performance arrangements under review. We'll need to do this through robust, continuous self-assessment, the findings of which will be reported through an annual report. The report, therefore, can only be as good as the arrangements that we have in place and the work that we have done to better understand our performance and react accordingly. The mainstay of the document is set out in section 4 of the appended report. Firstly, the report details progress made against the Council's agreed 9 county plan priorities, our wellbeing objectives, adopted by Council in December 22. You'll see at the start of section 4 there's an overview of progress made against our annual delivery plan, followed by a more detailed review of the work carried out. This in itself is a summary of the full delivery plan, which was presented to Council in July 2023. The development of the county plan and delivery plan has provided officers with a clear focus on our priorities for delivery, and I hope for members it will assure them of the Council's effectiveness, or where appropriate, give them the opportunity to constructively challenge the progress that we're making. Through the self-assessment, members will, I believe, get a sense of the progress that has been made over the last year, delivering our shared priorities. As always, the work undertaken is down to the coordinated efforts of staff, members, partners, and of course our communities who are playing an ever-increasing role. For each priority, we also set out the challenges for the future that we'll need to overcome in order to improve and take the Council forward, followed by a link to new development delivery plan that we are working on for 23-24. When we brought this report to you a year ago, we explained how we have developed our own complementary framework, which we believe will move us forward on becoming an outstanding council. And I'll just point out that we're not saying we're an outstanding council. This is just the framework in which we aspire to be that. This framework has been refined further over the past 12 months, and this year's report attempts to make this section far more corporate and strategic so that its focus is on delivering the big challenges to the organisation that will help us to take forward our ambitions. You will have also seen that throughout our report there is further context setting on how the Council integrates what it does through internal planning processes and joins with the work of partners, meets other important legislative requirements, plans its finances to support the delivery of the county plan, consults on its performance, monitors progress, and will seek to further improve on those arrangements. Self-assessment is extremely important to Torvine Council, not because it's legislatively required to produce a report each year, but because it creates the right culture for us as an organisation, one that is open to challenge and always looking to learn and improve. I hope that members do get a sense of this cultural shift that's coming through the report. We submit the report to the committee today for comments and recommendations regarding changes and to the conclusions or the actions the Council intends to take as a result of reporting on its self-assessment rather than individual matters of performance. I'll be happy to take any general questions about the report. I'm also joined here by the Council's leadership team, who are also on hand to answer any questions on specific service areas.
Thank you very much. Have we got any questions, comments? Councillor.
Perhaps if I start the ball rolling, maybe it'll encourage others to speak as well. I think, yes, a lot of information in here, obviously, and I think it's a very clear correlation with the county plan and the work that's being done in relation to that. I guess a couple of questions, really. The first was, to what extent has sort of data and information in relation to, say, public information that's come in, for example, compliments and complaints or questions that have come into scrutiny committees, how much has that sort of been taken on board, if you like, to give a level of reflection? That's my first question. The second question is what range of, you mentioned sort of working to get information from outside and from inside, but perhaps you could outline a little bit on sort of where some of that wider engagement to get data has been. And then finally, obviously in relation to this, you've mentioned the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. I'm conscious we have a new Future Generations Commissioner, so is that sort of giving a different lens perhaps to the approach that we're taking? So 3 general questions.
Would you like to take the answers?
I'll certainly pick up the first. I'll ask obviously other officers to talk about their own areas in terms of the second question, which is around broader engagement and data collection. I think, if I've got that correct. But just in respect of the first one, if I remember, it is reflecting on how the report reflects back on the work, the contribution of scrutiny and other input to the council. The answer is that happens throughout the year, of course it does, and that will naturally be reflected within the report. It may not mention some of those issues specifically, but the work that we do throughout the year is adapting to, responding to, and it is picking up the recommendations from scrutiny, and indeed is similarly constantly reflecting upon consultation and data that we've got in order for us to be as responsive as we possibly can. So in terms of us delivering against our corporate objectives and responding operationally, I think that is picked up as part of an everyday practice more than it is specifically referenced in the report. I'll ask officers perhaps to consider the second question before I come back to the third, just to keep things in order.
Sorry, Councillor, could you repeat the second question?
Sorry, it was just to get a flavour of some of the external reports, etc., because the report mentions getting both internal and external perspectives, so I'm just curious to know what some of those external perspectives were.
If just in considering from a children and families perspective, including education within that, obviously, there'll be lots of our regulatory, lots of our regulators will have inputted into the information there. So for CIW, particularly within the education world as well, the Estin report of last year and the follow-up visits we've had from Estin within social care. We had a CIW visit earlier in this year, which examined our PLO process. So there'll be external regulatory factors which will have contributed to that information as well.
I think that the 2 big examples from mine, particularly on Wellbeing Objective 4, would be the active travel, the major consultation engagement we did over the year in terms of our active travel network maps. Also on the climate change, Councillor Williams should be aware, sort of like that external perspective, we're just working with our ambassadors and the wider community when we obviously did a big conversation to seek views. And I think obviously clearly another one in terms of those external influences would be for Wellbeing Objective 5 about the recycling more and about the consultation over April, which led to then an announcement by the leader for a change of direction to inform the strategy. All 3 very different ways, but all very much focused on hearing the voice of the community to help drive our policies forward.
From an adults and communities perspective, there's been some specific consultation with residents around things like digital first customer strategy, library strategies. I've got the annual resident survey as well. So there's some specific consultations being carried out. From a customer care perspective, we also have introduced things like customer satisfaction surveys over the past sort of year, 18 months as well, to get some kind of real-time qualitative information from our residents as well.
And if I could ask, could you just repeat question 3, please, Councillor Williams, just so I make sure I cover that adequately? Thank you.
This was whether there'd been any engagement with the new Future Gens Commissioner, because obviously I'm conscious of being a new.
So the answer is I've met with the new Future Generations Commissioner once myself, soon after he was in post. A very productive meeting, I have to say, and a very welcome one. Our requirements, of course, here are prescribed within the legislation, and that's generally speaking what we are adhering to in terms of submitting this report. But it is fair to say that a new commissioner, as one would expect, will bring a fresh perspective, and we're looking forward to working with him as things go forward in the future. So further engagement is expected, and of course we're working hard to ensure that we are meeting the requirements of the legislation as part of our everyday practice.
Thank you. Thank you all for the comments.
Just to reiterate, so going back to your first question around complaints, again, just kind of reiterating what Stephen was saying, you know you might not see it mentioned specifically within the reports. I mean, we do have our 12-week performance cycle going into leadership team. You know, each director will be including information regarding their complaints within that report. So if there were any particular issues that were being raised constantly, then they would be coming forward. You know, obviously we also bring complaints into this committee, and in fact, the complaints report will be coming to the annual complaints report will be coming to your next committee meeting as well. Again, if that report was to raise significant issues, then perhaps you would see it come through more strongly within the report.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring in Councillor?
I just wanted to come back on one point, really, which was simply to sort of say that given, as Rachel has outlined, how there was reflection on the public perspective in reduction of waste, it could be perhaps sensibly referenced within this as an example of where we've taken constructive way forward.
Thank you. Councillor Davis, would you like to come in?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, on the 9 wellbeing objectives, number 3, it says tackle inequality by focusing on early indication and prevention. It says towards the bottom of page 9, tackling antisocial behaviour can improve feelings of safety and support people's mental health and physical well-being. I'm just wondering how we're going to proceed with that at the moment. We're seeing a lot of antisocial behaviour issues in our areas. Are we going to be expanding the team, the community safety team? Because at the moment they seem to be snowballed. It's in the report, that it's one of the 9 wellbeing objectives. Just wondered how are we going to proceed with that. It's quite an important topic in many of our areas.
Thank you. Would somebody like to answer the question?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Davis. It's a good question. You're right. I think all of our service areas are busy doing, working with our communities in order to address all of the 9 wellbeing objectives. Some may stand out at certain periods as more prominent than others, or maybe more of a challenge for us. What we try to do is respond as far as we are able to with the resources that we've got available to us. Of course, we are working hard, much more closely with communities on early intervention and prevention in order to stop issues within our communities escalating to the point that we require more formal intervention of our social care or our community public protection teams, etc. So I think the answer is it's not easy to reorganise ourselves to address specific peaks in certain types of activity, but we're constantly reviewing where that activity is and responding to it often in a targeted way, because our teams of course have limited resources available to them. And in the meantime, what we are most certainly doing is working really hard across all directorates, and directorates working together in order to have an early intervention and prevention approach so that we can stop these issues escalating as far as we are able. What I hope that members will see is that when those issues are brought to our team's attention, we're giving them a quick focus, and we're providing a very quick response and a very robust response. So it is about, to some degree, it's about trying to stop it happening, and we'll continue to monitor that. And in some circumstances where we're responding to particular incidents, then I think what we have got is services aligned to be able to do that. But as will often be the case, I imagine anybody in my position will say, we'll never have enough resources. As far as I'm concerned, I wish we had more, but we're managing within the resources that we've got.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ashley, you have a question?
Yes. Since you put the county executive, I've been struck that you've been trying to get from reacting to events to innovate. Could you describe how you've managed to do that? It is obviously something you just described there, but certainly with community. Can you say how you're trying to achieve that? Obviously, you've got budget constraints at the moment, but I have been struck by that, and it's something you've been doing in the community aspects. Could you illustrate how this has been happening, please?
I can certainly provide you with an example there. I mean, I suppose the approach that we're taking is, first of all, that we've got much more of a communities approach. And I think from a strategic point of view, we've got 9 wellbeing objectives that all of us, all directorates, are focused upon. These are not directorate specific. They are universally addressed across the council by all of the directorates, which I think is the right approach to that. But if I give you an example, which is what you've asked me to do, so I'll use the example of the work that we're doing with our cemeteries team and the work that we're doing to connect communities into setting what we think is a standard, an acceptable standard for local. Oh, we seem to. Oh no, sorry. I thought I'd lost the screen. We're setting we're working closely with our communities groups that support our cemeteries, our Friends of Cemeteries groups, across all 4 cemeteries across the borough. And we're very much focusing upon sharing power, I think is the best way to describe it. Very much interested in helping them, communities helping us to understand what expectations they have, where their priorities might be for their own communities. And we're deploying our resources, our staff resources, largely in order to respond to what communities have. So the formation of those friends groups, the connection to those friends groups, the listening to what people are saying is just one example where we're really sharing power and really being able to work much more closely with people in a much more innovative way that means that our resources can be spread further. As I've said, we've got a relatively small cemeteries team, just to use that example, but by working closely with communities, we can do a much better job at keeping on top of the community priorities and focus on the areas that the communities think are most important. And that's one example that we're just really getting on top of now, but I'm sure officers, if you need other examples, will add them too.
Chief, would this form of innovation help with tight resources? Is the other question that comes out of that one.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, Councillor Ashley. That's exactly what it does. I mean, it helps us, doesn't it, to understand what the priorities are for the community. It also helps us to deploy resources to where those priorities might be and understand better where those priorities might be. But it also means that we can understand the kind of work that we would expect our council officers to continue to do, and those that we might work with community groups in order to support. So if I just stick with the cemeteries example for a moment, it's a practical example there is, if we can communicate more effectively with the Friends of Cemeteries as to when we're going to do grass cutting, for example, they can help us with litter picking. They can help us to be clearing some of the graves of of items that perhaps shouldn't be there, for example. And we can then come along and they can help us to clear the site, generally speaking, and we can then come along with our industrial equipment or our equipment that we need in order to perform the duties that we've got there. And I think by coordinating in that way, what you'll see is if we were left to do that by ourselves, we would have we would not be able to get anywhere near done as much as we could. And that approach that I'm describing there is something that we want to expand on and work much more closely with. And there are other examples around work with schools in communities, work across other areas too. So, yeah, but you're right, it spreads the resources far more effectively. And actually, we want to do more of it.
Right, well, pardon me, Chair, indulge me a bit more. Just one more question. Where would you like to go?
Well, I'm going to rely upon our communities to tell us that, because certainly the cemeteries came to our attention because, if we're being honest with ourselves, resources were very scarce. We were down to there's only 6 people in the cemeteries team to begin with, and 2 of them were off at the time, leaving a cemeteries team of just 4 people managing across those 4 sites. So what the team have been doing is they've been working out a way to ensure that resources are more equitably spread across the street scene and cemeteries agenda. But also, we had a lot of concern being raised by the Friends of Cemeteries with us as a result of a shortage of resources that meant that they were very unhappy with the standards that were being maintained. So our response to that was to do exactly as I'm describing, and I think the more of that we can do, the better. We're already working with Glenavon members, not just on their cemetery, but also on some of the local town priorities, and that's something that we would like to do. So this is a plea really to work more closely with our members, with our community groups, with our friends of groups, in order to help us to establish what those priorities are and come out with us and work with us in order to ensure that we can make Torvine a wonderful place to live, work and play.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rees, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a number of points that I'd like to make, so I hope you can bear with me. The first thing is I'd like to thank you, Stephen, for taking on board something that I brought up at this meeting last year, which was when we were talking about how this plan, this report is consulted upon and scrutinised, that there should be some mention of the role of the Governance and Audit Committee. And it's now in there, and there's a link to what we do. I think that the other thing that I meant this time last year was that, but please keep that in there, is that there should be perhaps some brief description of what the Governance and Audit Committee is there to do. Emphasising, I think, that it's not just elected members, but it's it's co-opted lay members such as myself who are able to bring that sort of more independent look at it, if you know what I mean. But but thank you for that. In your actual report, paragraph 4.2.2, where you talk about further review and gathering of evidence, a senior managers event was held, and that it was felt in that meeting that the feedback was positive, and that the council was working towards the right set of characteristics. Now, that was a senior managers event. I wonder, were they expressing the views of the workforce as a whole? If they weren't able to do that, is there any way that you can gather the views of staff as a whole, as opposed to not just senior managers?
So thank you very much for recognising that we'd listened last year. That's very positive, and I see no reason at all why we couldn't include a brief description. As you rightly say, this is part of the process of governing this report. Tom, is that too late to adapt the report today to include that? It's not, is it? If you make that as a formal recommendation today, I'm sure that's something that we could respond to today.
Thank you very much. I wasn't expecting to be able to do that here and now, but and I do not want to make it more detailed, more complicated than it already is. But if we could have that in there, that would be really good. Thank you.
No, I think that genuinely adds value. So thank you for that. So with respect to the development of the characteristics of an outstanding council, those characteristics were initially devised actually as part of a very broad consultation in respect of establishing the 8, as were the headlines, I suppose, that sat under, that defined each of those characteristics. We also spoke to staff at that time about whether how we thought we might be able to improve them, and the feedback there was that perhaps a degree more definition. I mean, what we were very mindful of, and staff were aware of this too, were acutely aware of this. They were aware of it too. What we didn't want to do was sort of overcomplicate that framework in which we're operating. It's a useful reference point for us, but we didn't want to be over prescriptive. But there was reference in that conversation with staff about saying, well, we've developed them, we're very welcoming of them, and that happened actually over 2 or 3 sessions with an extended group of staff, much larger than that. Around about 150 of our staff were involved in that process. We then recognised that the challenge that they put down was whether or not we needed to further refine them, and that's the piece of work that we specifically did with the leadership team, was just that extra refining of them. Now, as we say throughout the report and throughout the process of developing those outstanding characteristics, it is an iterative process. And whilst we don't want to be reinventing the wheel every year, once we get somewhere with them, as new ideas come on board for developing them further, for getting them better, more established within the organisation, getting them adopted more holistically across our staff groups, which is where your question, I think, takes us to some degree. I think there is always an opportunity for us to do more of that engagement. And again, if that's a recommendation that this group wants to consider, then we would certainly continue to iterate and develop and consult more broadly with our staff on those areas. But just to assure you, they were established as a wide consultation and refined to some degree with a much smaller group, that's true, and that's reflected in the report.
Thank you again, Stephen. Yeah, that satisfies my view on that. That's good. I don't feel that we need to be making anything more specific about that, but it's quite clear that things are in place to gather that evidence. I've got a few more points, if you don't mind, Chair. In the actual body of the wellbeing report, someone's touched upon it earlier, recycling, and I know there was controversy in inverted commas earlier in the year. The way that it is put across in the report, I think, is good. It's positive. It's talking about education, giving out more information, trying to encourage people more. But at some point, if those targets aren't reached, then you are going to have to be looking at some possible punitive measures at some point. So I was just wondering whether that's in the back of people's minds. Didn't need to go into the report this year, but possibly it has to at some point in the future. There was reference to Audit Wales on page 21, I believe, of the report. Very satisfactory results, but there was a phrase that more work needs to be done, and I just wondered if that could be fleshed out a bit more. What do you actually mean by that? And just one last point then, on page 32 of the actual report, where it's talking about helping people to be able to stay in their homes or be able to go back to their homes more quickly when they've been in hospital, reablement services, basically. You highlight all the good work that the council is doing, but do you think there should be some references to partner organisations, the third sector, care and repair, for example, where you are helping them by passing on funding to them to then deliver on some of these things. I just thought that there should be perhaps reference to that in there. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So in November this year, we're just working with partners from local partnerships and also from RAP, who are helping us to formulate the new strategy around waste. A report will be coming to Cabinet. I do apologise, to Cabinet, in respect of the findings which are ongoing throughout the summer period in November this year. And I imagine that you're talking about there, some of the challenges and the way forward will be set out within that plan, which it's fair to say will be covering, I think, the next 2, 3, 4 years of a strategy that takes us forward in terms of, reaching our recycling targets. So I'd expect certainly to see more reference to that in next year's report. I think that's fair to say. The reference from the audit, from Audit Wales, I think what Audit Wales was saying there, that they've recognised that we've established put a lot of effort into establishing new infrastructure, new internal governance processes. We've put a lot of effort into establishing a new performance framework, a new cycle of performance monitoring, but what they were also recognising that at the point they came to review the council, some of that work, although not all of it, some of that work was still in the process of relatively early implementation. The cycle of performance reviews was well established, but some of the performance reporting that was coming into those reviews was still being established. And I think that's what they were referring to, reflecting really that we've put the foundations in, we've done a lot of necessary and hard work to establish that, but now we need to get the machinery up and running and then see, and then obviously see how it's working. And to some degree, that's partly what this report, I think, reflects and represents, and obviously you'll be scrutinising here today. With regards to the final point, I think you make another strong point there. We need to ensure that we reflect on the partnerships that we form with people across our communities and in other professional circles, because we do play a large role. So lots of services are co-delivered, we have influence over one another in respect of how services are delivered and how we're tackling problems that are shared. And again, I think that's partly what's behind the partly behind the question there, if I might be so bold. So I think, yes, we'll certainly take on board that we need to perhaps be sure that we're giving a fair representation as to what those external partnerships and roles, responsibilities and accountabilities look like. And I think that that's certainly something we'll review the report against and ensure that we're reflecting accurately both actually the work that the council does, but also and the investments that we make, but also the work of our partners, because working in partnership is of course part of the solution. We're not going to be able to do this by ourselves, and I hope that we can get that over more clearly as the reports evolve and come back next time, perhaps.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Councillor Davis, you have your hand raised. Thank you for being patient.
Oops, that's okay. I'm not sure I can ask this. It's nothing to do with waste mind. It's about education, because I'm quite new to the committee. I see at point 1 on the plan, raise educational attainment, helping young people and adults to gain qualifications and skills needed to lead positive lives. I've been following, I'm not sure whether this is the right place for this thing, been reading with interest about in England, they're banning mobile phones in schools because of things like bullying, and it takes up a lot of kids' time to be like this all day rather than taking part in the lesson. I'm just wondering whether that was something we would be looking at in the future for a report like this, to perhaps as Torvain, introducing Torvain schools a similar type of ban, because I think teachers have a lot of headaches with pupils using their mobiles throughout class, filming things and perhaps texting, a bit of bullying going on. Would that be something we could look at in the future to put in a report? Do you think that would help at all with our education system and well-being for youngsters and gaining extra qualifications? I'm not sure. It's only I've been taking interest in what's been going on in other parts of the UK, and I don't know that other areas, other countries have banned mobile phones. Whether it's something we as an authority would be looking at, would that help our education at all and school behaviour? As I said, I'm not sure I could ask this year because I knew the committee was just something that jumped out on me when I was reading through the objectives. So I apologise if it is the wrong place. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Davis. I think the answer is, I won't comment specifically on mobile phones because that may be a conversation for the future in terms of forming a strategy to tackle those very challenges that you're describing. But objective 1, which is deliberately the one that talks about raising educational attainment across our borough, it was put at number 1 within the county plan for good reason. We recognise this is a clear priority for us as a council, and it very much links to the work that had been going on through the previous corporate delivery plan, of course, where educational attainment was also a priority within that. So I think the answer to that question really is we're very keen, of course, to raise educational attainment, raise standards in our schools, to do absolutely everything that we can to support our schools to make that possible and give people all of the tools that they need in the bag to ensure that children are in school and they're learning and they're getting the very best quality education in the best settings that they can possibly get. So there's a range of strategies that we've got in place to tackle some of those challenges that you've just described. And if one of them of the future, a discussion point of the future, is around things like, ensuring that, mobile phones, uniforms, all kinds of challenges aren't there in respect of the things that can lead to bullying. Certainly, we'd be happy to talk about that. As I said, perhaps not in this forum here, but certainly happy to talk about that as part of raising the standards in schools and to aspiring to deliver outcomes against objective 1.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, I think you've got a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just a couple of small suggestions, really. The first one was possibly there's an opportunity here to mention the fact that Torvine does have champions for particular things. It struck me, for example, in mental health on page 41, and I know we've got a couple of the champions who are members of this committee. So I think that's an opportunity to show how we're looking at getting that input and broadening our reach. On page 44, I think, again, it's making quite clear that the Torvine Access Forum is an independent body that provides, so it's not a council body. And final point is, I think there was a very good summary around communities, but I was struck on page 35 around equipping communities with the skills and resources. And I think I've been conscious, for example, of the opportunity to have, prior to becoming a councillor, and while I was involved with the voluntary group, to do first aid refresher training. So things like food hygiene, first aid are the sorts of things that can be quite helpful to equip communities in terms of some of what they do. So that may be a consideration down the line. It's perhaps not for this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley, you have your hand raised.
So I do. I was sorry, I don't know the name of the independent member, but he raised a really interesting point about collaborative bodies, something that we did in scrutiny back a few years ago. And I'm wondering how the Chief Executive can reflect that in what is in effect Torvine County's county plan. That obviously we got, the last time I looked at it, it was about 70 to nearly 80 collaborative bodies that by necessity we do South East Wales and whatever they are. We had, I remember one scrutiny, we actually had a good look at all of this lot. How we reflect that much, well, by necessity, professionally, obviously economically, and by the fact it's a very good way of working. How we reflect that into our county plan. We obviously got PSB, which local PSB and regional PSB, of which Councillor Williams is a member. I'll say that, David, not to embarrass you on that one, but there's an awful lot of work and going on there. For the information of other members that might not know it, I chaired a few of those over the years. A lot of information comes at us, but the important thing is that information needs to be captured somewhere. I've just gone back through and realised that it's not being captured here. How do we assure that then, Stephen, that we actually get this information back into this forum for members and members of this committee and the council? Because it's an awful lot of stuff there, and it was a conversation I think we've had over the years.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Ashley. You're right. We work collaboratively with many bodies at national, regional and local levels, and it is necessarily a complex system in which we work in order to, as you say, we couldn't do this by ourselves, and we wouldn't be anywhere near as successful working in isolation, and that's likely to grow. That those opportunities are going to grow. I think, to answer your question, in some ways, that's the purpose of the way we do things, and the standards to which we aspire, as really are set out, I suppose, as part of that those characteristics. That's kind of explaining how we will achieve some of that you're describing, which is why we felt the characteristics framework was so important and something for us to work to. Of course, individual lines and individual lines of collaboration are things that that individual scrutinies may well consider throughout the year to see how well they're working, etc. But I think the part of it is, of course, is our commitment to work in those kinds of partnerships, necessarily so. And some of them is to hold ourselves to account through frameworks like the characteristics of an outstanding council to ensure that we are working in the right way to ensure that they are as effective as they can possibly be. I think, as you say, there are many hundreds of them, and it would be a very difficult thing to reflect something from each of them, even line by line, quite frankly, in a report like this. But I suppose the overall assurance that we're trying to give you is that we're working in the right way to ensure that those collaborations are in place and they are as effective as they can possibly be. And we are leading where we need to be leading, and we are partners alongside others where the expectation is that they are leading. And that's more about the way that we work. as opposed to it is lines of delivery.
Can I go back very briefly? Then maybe what we need is, I don't know, the word roadmap or map or something like that. It does actually need that. Probably a plea I made a few years back on the same subject, to need to know where we're going with that and how that's fulfilled. Would that be possible?
It probably needs further understanding and exploration. More than happy to have a conversation offline to see whether or not we can unpick some of that, Councillor. I could see it being, I suppose, we'd always, anything we're doing, we're always asking the value-added question. And I'm not, and then there is always, if you create those kinds of frameworks, do you end up, how do you keep them up to date and how do you reflect them accurately?
That's
so I think I would come back to the question around individual lines of scrutiny, individual scrutiny groups interrogating their area place by place, and if that may be something that then is reflected in an annual replan, just in terms of the way that the questions that other scrutiny groups are asking. That might be one way forward, Councillor Ashley, but it might be something we need to sit down and do a little bit more exploration around.
Sorry to come back a minute, because that's always my worry. We've got some outstanding individuals working in the organisation, but if we don't keep a key on these, who talk to who and what and why, as we found, that we sometimes lose the people that do this. Sometimes they are down to personal contacts. Sometimes they're down to formal contacts, and that was the point that we actually noted on this. And things simple as canals or cemeteries, as you talked about, they're down to individuals, and if the individual goes, you sometimes find the problem there. That's a theme I've had for the last 5 years on this one. So pardon me if I raise it, but I think your county plan is actually a good start, an outstanding council is where we need to go with this, to be honest.
Thank you, Councillor Ashley. It seems as if it's work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Any other hands raised? I can't see anybody else. I think if everybody's had fair input, I'd like to personally say thank you for putting this report together. Thank you for all your departments and all the hard work that's gone into it. It's a very comprehensive, reasonably easy to read report, which I appreciate. And if we can move on to the recommendations, which are on page 9. If everybody on the committee is happy that we accept this report. Does anybody want to abstain? Otherwise, I'll take them as agreed. Okay, thank you. I'll take them as agreed. Moving on to agenda item 4, Torfaen County Borough Council detailed audit plan. Charlotte Owen, I think you're going to present the plan.
Hi Chair, it's actually me, Alice King. I'm going to present the plan with some input from Charlotte.
Okay,
that's
thank
okay.
You, Alice.
Okay, thanks. So good afternoon, everyone. I know I gave a brief introduction at the beginning of this meeting, but I am the new financial audit manager for Torfaen. I've replaced Julie Rees recently as the manager. I've been working with the team to deliver the audit since about the end of July, but I haven't had a chance to meet you all yet, so just wanted to introduce myself properly. And I know Charlotte is also in a similar position where she has taken over as the performance audit lead from Beth Ann, probably in a similar time frame to me. So both like to say hello and look forward to meeting and working with you over the next few months. So I'm going to take you through the detailed audit plan for the financial year 22-23. You'll remember that this is the first year where we will have delivered 2 audit plans for you to consider. The first was more of an outline summary, which I believe Julie presented to you in the June committee meeting, which was a high-level plan. This plan we're bringing to you today is far more detailed and is the output of our detailed planning audit work, which we've now completed. So I will be presenting that to you along with Charlotte. So I will presume that you've all had a chance to read the report in its entirety, and I'll just highlight a couple of areas to take you through. And those areas are going to be the significant financial statement risks, the other areas of audit focus. Charlotte will then take you through the planned performance audit work, and I'll just finish by touching on the audit fee. But I'm more than happy to take any questions about anything that's contained in the report, so please feel free to ask me questions at the end. So starting off with the financial significant risks, there's one of those risks that we've identified through our planning work, and that's detailed on page 74 of the report pack if you're trying to find it. So this significant risk is one that we cannot rebut on any of our bodies, and so we always raise this risk, which is the risk of management override, present in all our entities. And so we have provided you some detail of that risk there, which I won't go through in totality, but also then we've given our planned response to that risk, which follows a pretty standard audit approach from Audit Wales. Moving on then to the other areas of focus, these are risks that we still have identified, but we haven't deemed them to be significant. And there are three risks that we've found from our detailed planning work we wanted to bring to your attention. So those are the valuation of land and buildings, the valuation of the pension fund net liability, and related party transactions. They're on page 75 and 76 of the report pack. So firstly, the valuation of land and buildings. This risk covers both the valuation of your land and buildings and also then the accounting entries and adjustments. So we've covered both areas in this risk. The first part of that is that it's an inherently quite complex and uncertain given recent movements in building material costs, etc. And so there's a large amount of estimation in the valuation of your land and buildings, and it's also significantly material to your accounts. So we will be looking to ensure that the valuation process is undertaken appropriately, and we'll be testing a sample of those items. And we will also then check that the accounting adjustments for those valuations are undertaken correctly and processed correctly for your accounts. Moving on then, the second risk is the valuation of pension fund net liability, very similar to the valuation of property. It's a very complicated estimation exercise undertaken by actuaries to estimate the pension fund net liability, and again it's very significant to your accounts. So we'll be looking to review the work of the actuary alongside some auditor experts to make sure that that estimation process has been undertaken correctly. And then finally, we've raised the risk around related party transactions. So related parties are always a specific area of interest to us as the external audit team, and we normally will prescribe a lower materiality for related parties as we deem them to be of interest to the reader of the accounts. So we have, I think, previously identified some issues with the presentation of those in the accounts, and so we've raised that as a risk given the lower materiality that they could be misstated. So they're the three specific areas that have come out of our detailed planning work. I will hand you over now to Charlotte, who can take you through the planned performance audit work for this year.
Thanks, Alice. Yes, so the planned performance audit work for 23-24 is set out there. There's four main projects. The first one, which is ongoing at the moment, is the assurance and risk assessment work. Some of you might be familiar with that. We undertake that every year to gain sort of assurance or where there are potential risks, which helps us identify what our local work will be for the following year. As I say, that's underway at the moment, and we'll be reporting to the council next year. I think it'll be early February. Then we will be continuing our sort of work looking at financial sustainability in councils. So we'll have a thematic review which we'll be undertaking across all 22 councils, and that will likely be taking place in the new year. The other thematic review that we're doing across all councils this year will be looking at commissioning and contract management, looking at sort of value for money considerations and whether the council is applying the Wellbeing Future Generations Act Sustainable Development Principle in its arrangements for that. And then finally, the local project this year will be counter fraud and whistleblowing. And this is a follow-up piece of work to a national report that we issued in, I think it was 2020. And so we'll be following up to see what progress that the council has made against the recommendations in that national report. And again, that will be taking place in the new year. I will hand you back to Alice now in case you had anything further to add, but very happy to answer any questions on the performance audit work programme.
Thanks, Charlotte. So yeah, the last section I just wanted to briefly touch on was the fee and audit team. And so that is on page 80 of the report pack. Just to highlight to you the total audit fee that we will be raising this year, which has been split out across the audit of accounts work, the grants work, and also our performance audit work. So just to draw your attention to that total fee that we're going to raise there. Apart from that, I'm happy to take any other questions, but that was going to be the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you both very much. Has anybody got any questions? I see no hands raised. Can I assume that there are no questions? If so, can we just accept this report as read? Thank you both very much, and we look forward to dealing with you in the future.
Thanks, Chair.
Was there a hand raised then? Sorry. No. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry,
I was only going to observe, I presume that the reports will come to this committee in due course anyway, so that'll be our opportunity to, if you like, ask questions in more detail.
Okay, thank you both. Right, that takes us on to our agenda item 4, which is the date and the time of the next meeting. Can I just thank everybody for attending? It's lovely to see all the faces that we see names of and papers, and it's nice to put names to faces. Thank you all. Thanks very much for your input.
Okay.
It's been like your meeting today, hasn't it? Date and time of the next meeting is the 18th of October at 10 AM here in the Council Chamber. Thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.